Hello. So, good evening, everyone. And I'm happy I may welcome you to this event. I have met some of you a little bit earlier, but just for the new faces that I see here now, my name is Cristina Biasetto, and I'm responsible for the Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention at the Austrian Commission for UNESCO. And let me start by saying how truly happy and honored I am about the collaboration between the Austrian Commission for UNESCO and the Vorarlberg Museum to hold this event. A warm thank you goes to Fatih, where's he now? There. For his commitment and hard work preparing this session and the entire conference program that is held today and tomorrow. And I would also like to express my gratitude to the director of the Vorarlberg Museum, Michael Kaspar, for supporting this initiative and for his long-standing dedication to intangible cultural heritage in the region of Vorarlberg. And since 2023, he's also a much valued member of our ICH, Intangible Cultural Heritage Advisory Board at the Austrian Commission for UNESCO. So before I start in the evening with the introduction of this evening program and presenting also our dear presenters, I would like to take the opportunity and hand over the word to Michael Kaspar for a short greeting, followed also by Martin Fritz, our General Secretary of the Austrian Commission for UNESCO, for a few welcoming words to our guests. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. Ladies and gentlemen, dear distinguished guests, on behalf of the Vorarlberg Museum, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this UNESCO event here in Bregenz. This evening's program brings together experts, researchers, and representatives of diverse communities to discuss how intangible cultural heritage can be made more visible and also accessible in our pluralistic society. It connects people from very different backgrounds, and as the new ICOM museum definition highlights, museums are now called to actively engage with both tangible and intangible heritage. And this shift in the museum society reflects the growing recognition that museums should be more inclusive spaces, open to different social groups, and also responsive to the diversity of our contemporary society. At the Vorarlberg Museum, this commitment and this understanding is central to our mission and to our self-concept. We see ourselves, as we see this evening as well, as a platform for dialogue, a place where living heritage is not only preserved, but also practiced and discussed. This evening is, in my opinion, a very important step towards making intangible heritage more visible, especially from those communities and traditions that have often remained rather in the background. We are proud that this event is taking place here in our house, and it is really an honor for us and a confirmation for our commitment to inclusion, openness, and engagement with different communities. I would like to extend the thank to all who have made this evening possible and to everybody who is here and takes place at the discussion afterwards. And I would also like to mention my colleague, my dear colleague, Fatih Özçelik from our museum team, who has really made a special contribution to the preparation of this event. Thank you. And I have to admit, unfortunately, there's a parallel event going on at 7 p.m. I have to take place at a presentation of our new volume of our museum's publication series this evening, so I cannot stay for the whole program. Nevertheless, I wish you really an inspiring evening and exchange, learning, new perspectives. Thank you for being here, and part of this important discussion and conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I would like to give the word to our General Secretary, Martin Fritz, who is fortunately here online with us today. So, Martin, if I may give you the word.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christina, for your introduction. Thank you very much, Michael Kasper, for your words of welcome, and of course, great thanks to Fatih Şedik for the cooperation on this very wonderful collaboration, which is very dear to us. I remember 2 years ago, Michael Kasper and I were on a podium at Vorarlberg Museum discussing a controversy on intangible heritage about the burning of a female effigy as part of a local custom. And then we approached Michael Kasper for our advisory board, and I take pride in saying that it was only after we asked him that he was appointed director of Vorarlberg Museum. So we take pride in this fact. So this is a continuing collaboration, and a collaboration which is very dear to us. I also thank, and I think it's a great cooperation that Österreichisches Netzwerk für Migrationsgeschichte took our program, our joint program, as part of its annual conference, because who could be better informed and who could be more knowledgeable about diversity, plurality of perspectives within the Austrian society than Netzwerk für Migrationsgeschichte. And maybe, one anecdote, why is this still so important? It was only 5 minutes ago, actually, that I realized that my address is supposed to be in English. So why do I think that talking about intangible heritage in Bregenz could only be in German? Why have I thought that? So this, again, made me realize how presumably clearly defined our categories sometimes are, and how important it is to change them and to expand them. So I'm very happy to welcome all of you on behalf of the Austrian Commission for UNESCO. As you know, we are the, let's say, quasi-representative information office and consulting office for all programs of UNESCO in its member state. Every member state has a national commission, and we're happy that within the field of culture, which is only one of the 4 pillars of UNESCO's programs in education, sciences, culture, and communication, that within culture, as you know, the big heritage programs, the intangible heritage, the world heritage, and the lesser known program Memory of the World, which technically relates to the communication pillar of UNESCO, but for today, we can happily include it within the theme. All these heritage categories bound together by the notion of cultural diversity are very important. And I have to admit that we are aware that the representation in the inventory of intangible heritage in Austria does not sufficiently reflect the diversity of a contemporary Austrian society. We are aware of its deficits, and tonight, and our continuing work is to change that. And so we are happy about at least having included the songs of the Lovara in Burgenland or Slovene topographical notions in Carinthia within the inventory. But of course, we want to go on. And this is where we count also on your help. So please make us aware, tell us and let us know about activities, groups, be it in research or in practice, who could potentially benefit from the attention that comes with the inventories and the programs that UNESCO is pursuing. We were extremely happy, like when last year we were able to include the Sammlung zu Hause, Migrant Stories from the Tyrol, an archival collection from Dokumentationsarchiv Migrationsgeschichte Tirol, in the National Inventory for the program Memory of the World, so the documentary heritage. So we depend on you, we depend on your expertise, your contacts, and your insight, and please approach Cristina Biasetto in the course of the program, or after the program, approach us by any means of communications. And having said that, I really look forward to listening to the definitely inspiring talks, and I wish you a very successful program today and tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Held many important topics already, from the inventory to the deficits that come with it. I will shortly come back to this anonymously named Inventory of Intangible Cultural Heritage that has been mentioned by Martin now a few times. But before, I would give a short overview of the evening with the title, A Multi-Rooted Intangible Heritage of Our Multi-Rooted Society, das ist Immaterielle Erbe unserer vielheimischen Gesellschaft, which we will be tackling on different levels. First, we will hear from our two great speakers, Marc Schepp from the Dutch Center for Intangible Cultural Heritage, followed by Ceren Güneres from the University of Ankara, who will each hold a presentation surrounding the work of different institutions with the cultural heritage, intangible cultural heritage of different backgrounds, and work both with cultural heritage within diverse societies. Unfortunately, they could not be present with us today. They will be presenting online, but that does not influence at all the quality of their presentations. We're happy and thankful to have you both here with us this evening, sharing your experience and your knowledge with us. Following these presentations, you will have the possibility to ask some questions to our speakers. And after that, there will be a brief pause, and we will proceed in the program mentioned World Cafe format, settled around 4 thematic tables. We had to reduce one because a host fell out, but you will be able to be part of a table for circa 25 minutes and then change the topic. So we'll be participating in 2 different table topic rounds. After these tables, each host of the tables will summarize what has been talking about in the last 15 minutes to an hour in these tables. And after the summary of each table, there will be a general summary, because we were fortunate enough to have today Mr. Dennis de Jong here with us, who will be graphically recording this event, the whole evening, and who has no experience of graphic recording. I think it would be a visualized summary, maybe I hope I actually heard that, a visualized summary of the event. So we'll have one table where you will have an overview of all the different topics that will be talked about this evening. Is this correct? Okay. After these presentations, we will conclude the evening with a little get-together for those who, after 3 hours, need a little bit of strength and motivation afterwards, because I think it will be a thought-intensive evening this day. I just want to go briefly back on some notions and some things that have been mentioned during the introduction, but also are part of the description of the title, the intangible heritage or the intangible cultural heritage. Maybe a little bit of context to where does this term intangible heritage come from? It comes from the UNESCO Convention of 2003 for the safeguarding of the intangible cultural heritage. It was adopted, well, as the title says, in 2003 to broaden the understanding of cultural heritage in general at an international level. Up to that point, the focus had been mainly been made on tangible heritage. So most of you will be familiar with the concept of world heritage related to sites and natural spaces and places. But this newer convention had made an important step in recognizing the protection of living practices, expressions, knowledge, and skills that communities, groups, and sometimes individuals consider part of their cultural identity and are transmitted from one generation to the next with a dynamic nature and especially a people-based nature. So intangible heritage is connected to the people that practice the skills and have the knowledge. So there are about 5 categories in which it is divided, which is oral traditions, performing art, social practices, knowledge about nature and the universe, as well as traditional crafts. Around 184 countries around the world signed this international treaty set up by UNESCO, which shows how big the commitment or how large the commitment has become to support and safeguard this living heritage or living practices. And with the notion has fallen several times. With the signing of this treaty, state parties are obliged to make a national inventory. Well, we have it in a printed version, but also online version. So to collect the intangible heritage that is being lived at on the national territory. And in Austria, we've been maintaining such an inventory since 2010, with new entries being added every year, from small local traditions to larger scale cultural practices. Currently, there are about 174 entries. And what is the purpose of this inventory? This is to help visualize and the diversity and richness of practices across the country. But, and this is essential, the purpose of the list is to showcase practice on the territory, not from the territory, which means practices of intangible cultural heritage is important to practitioners that live everywhere, regardless of where they originated. And as I mentioned before in the short introduction before this event, the beautiful thing about intangible heritage is, as it is attached to the people, it can be brought everywhere. So it goes where the people go, so to say. And it reflects the key principle of this convention: living heritage is inseparable from its people. About the diversity, as Martin already mentioned in his introduction, our national inventory does not reflect at this point maybe the diversity lived on this territory at the moment. So I think there is room to grow. But this event hopefully helps give a little bit of an incentive to broaden, to search for good examples, and maybe for us also incentives to where could we work further to help the diversification of this national inventory. With this being said, these are some core topics of these evenings that accompany these evenings: diversification and national inventory, the living heritage transported by people. And we invited today Mark Schepp from the Dutch Center for Intangible Cultural Heritage as a first speaker, as they are, at least from a perspective of people who work with the convention, a very good practice example on how to work with diverse communities while working with the convention. So Mark Schepp may share his experience and his collaboration practices, and how also research contributed, especially research contributes to this work with the convention diverse communities. Followed Mark Schepp's intervention is the presentation by Ceren Güneres, who will highlight the work of museums in Turkey with the topic of cultural heritage of migrants, sharing also examples from different museums on how they tackle the topic. So thank you all again for being here, and without further ado, I look forward to the discussions and the insights gained from today. And now I thankfully can hand over to Marc Schepp to hold this first intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina, for this introduction. Hopefully you can hear me now. I think you can hear me. I will talk a little bit for the next 20 minutes about how we work as the Dutch Center for Intangible Cultural Heritage. And I will mainly address the next topic. Let me see. Yeah. I will talk a little bit about our organization, how we do research, and our general way of working. And I will introduce some examples from the field. And those are also examples from museums that we are familiar with or that I visited recently that also work with communities and diverse communities in particular. And a lot of the things that were part of my introduction about the convention were already told by Christina. So that's great. So I can skip a little bit faster to that part, because you just heard about living heritage and what intangible cultural heritage is. Well, my organization has this in its name, the Dutch Center for Intangible Cultural Heritage. So this is our framework. We work with the UNESCO Convention. And especially important is in our work to support the safeguarding of the heritage and to raise awareness to the importance of intangible cultural heritage. So that's mainly the focus of our work. And one important thing, and Christina also talked about it, is that human beings, people, are the center of this convention. And Article 15 of the convention also states that working with intangible heritage, you should do this with the widest possible participation of communities, groups, and individuals. And in comparison to the World Heritage Convention, as mentioned, this is a big change because now people are at the center of attention because they are the ones that perform all the practices that we now call intangible cultural heritage. And this convention that was signed in 2003 is implemented by my organization, the Dutch Center for Intangible Cultural Heritage. In Dutch, we have the acronym KIN. So when I say KIN, I mean this Dutch Center. And since 2012, the Netherlands ratified the convention. And since that moment, KIN is responsible for the implementation. And the main things we do is assistance with safeguarding. And that can be, for example, organizing workshops on a specific theme, organizing meetings where people can meet and exchange, but also help to write a safeguarding plan. We also engage in international cooperation, mainly with the countries that were former colonies of the Netherlands, for example, Indonesia or Suriname. Also because of what Christina said, the heritage is of the people and people move from country to country and they take their intangible cultural heritage with them. So we also try to connect people from the diaspora with people from the home country to see whether they can learn from each other. And one of the main things we also do is research. And this research often is focused on safeguarding issues. So we don't really research the history of the intangible heritage, but we mainly focus on questions surrounding the safeguarding. And that can be quite broad. As you will see in the examples I will give. We started, and I say we, but I did not work there yet in 2012, but the Dutch Center started with 3 employees in 2012, and now we have 16. So that's great. We have a lot of more people to work on the convention and the safeguarding and visibility of intangible heritage. Mainly we have 5 researchers 5 heritage advisors or community workers. And then we have 2 communication officers and a director and a team leader, and 2 people for the international cooperation. So it's quite a big team compared to a lot of other countries, I can say. So that's great. And we are independent from the government. We are subsidized, but we can make our own plans. Of course, they try to see whether we do a good job, but we are independent. Well, one of the main tasks, and it was also mentioned, is to make an inventory of the ICH. We only do this online, so we don't have a book or another form, like some countries have a calendar or an encyclopedia. We only have this online version of the inventory. And each person in the Netherlands can apply and inscribe their intangible heritage to this inventory. We are in the process of changing the process to get on the inventory, because it's quite an intensive procedure. You have to write a safeguarding plan, follow a workshop of 3 days, and every 3 years you have to reflect on your safeguarding plan. And over the last years, we did research on this procedure. Also, for example, I interviewed Christina and other colleagues in Europe, and we saw that although it also gives a lot of insights on safeguarding, it's also putting a lot of pressure on the communities, and maybe it's not really helping all the communities. For some communities, it's already helping them if they are visible online without making this extensive safeguarding plan. So we are changing this way of working this year. You can also see this little sign on the street. Some of the communities got the opportunity to make a little video and could give information for application. And now they can put these signs in the streets where their village or in their city where the heritage is performed. Because a lot of the heritage is only visible when it's, for example, the specific festivity, 1 day a year or 1 week. And a lot of the intangible heritage is performed throughout the year. For example, they prepare, they make, for example, a car for a flower parade, but that's not visible on the streets. So we try to make this more visible via these signs. So you can see them all around in the Netherlands, and then you can scan these signs to get information about this particular form of ICH. So that's one added layer to making this heritage visible. Well, our way of working, over the years, of course, we used the convention as a sort of guideline for how to work with intangible heritage. And in this, communities were and are important. But I myself and recently also my colleagues were also inspired by the work, and Teren will also talk about it a little bit, of Nina Simon. And I especially her but the work that she wrote 10 years ago about how to be relevant for communities. And one of the key findings from this book, I would say, is that you should find your relevance in what is relevant to the community. And in this process, it is important to make a room together. She uses the metaphor of keys, doors, and rooms. And normally you are a museum or an organization that has this specific room that is suitable for some people, but not for all. And if you want to be more open, more inclusive, you should try to make a new room with new communities. And in this process, it's important to be open, to really get to know the communities, to build trust, which takes a lot of time. Get insights in what they want, so their needs, but also their assets. What are they capable of? What do they want to show? So these are for me some key learnings from this book. And especially I want to highlight one quote of the book. Nina Simon writes, "You have to spend time with the outsiders you seek. learning about their expectations and their strengths and fears. And when you learn something that you can act on, even if that something is counter to what insiders expect, you have to be willing to change, or at least to open up a new door in a new direction. And we are also struggling a bit with this now because, since the start of our inventory, we have a lot of communities that are part of the inventory, and they were already familiar with the predecessor of the organization, which was the Center for Folk Culture. So at the start of the inventory, we mainly had communities of white people that performed the typical Dutch traditions. And over the years, we became more diverse. And when your community of, or when your public or audience is changing, you also have to change yourself. And sometimes that is not what the insiders want. So you always have to find a balance between being there for the people that were already there, but also finding new doors for the outsiders that also can become an insider. So we did with these insights, we try to work, in the upcoming years. And it is also reflected in our way of researching. We have 5 researchers, as I mentioned. Most of us are anthropologists or historians. Myself, I'm educated as a psychologist and historian, but also minoring in anthropology. And our work as a researcher mainly focuses on fieldwork. So just be there where it happens, observe, participate with the communities, talk with them, but also making exhibitions together, writing articles, giving guest lectures. And some of the themes we focus on are, for example, sustainability, the colonial past and present, migration, of course, queer ICH, and also the relationship between animals, people, and ICH. And to dig a little bit deeper in our way of working, very important for us is to really get to know each other. So you can have, of course, as a researcher, this question in mind and just research it. But for us, it's important to get to know the community, the intangible heritage, and then together with the community, come up with relevant questions to them. And we also try to really collaborate with them. And ideally, we also do it with researchers out of the community. So the whole process could be with the community, especially also because often as a researcher, you just go to the community, talk with them, write something about them. But we also try to write together and present together about the research. And we also try to focus not on, in the contact we have with communities, to get them on the inventory. That can be a byproduct, I would say, but it's not the main focus. We can also get into contact and do other things together without them being inscripted in the inventory. Although we want to have diverse inventory, this is not the main goal to always get on the inventory. Some example. For example, one of my colleagues, Jet Bakels, co-created with 10 communities and the Natuurhistorisch Museum, Natural History Museum in Rotterdam, exhibition about the relationship between animals, humans, and intangible heritage. And in this process, she met a lot of people. For example, this guy from the Surinamese singing bird tradition. And he participated in this exhibition and also decided that he wanted to be on the national inventory. So in this case, it was also sort of a double result, if you could call it like that. But this whole process was together with the communities. The museum, in the end, was responsible for the design, but the communities gave objects, were interviewed, also wrote texts, and really got a chance to tell their story. Another project that I myself was engaged in is a co-creation with youngsters from a super diverse neighborhood in Arnhem, which is also the location of the Open Air Museum. the open air museum typically is not the place they visit, but the museum wanted to be more open and more inclusive to communities they normally don't reach. So they got into contact with a youth organization in this neighborhood. And this organization was founded because they wanted to develop or create chances for young people in this neighborhood. So together with this foundation and this group of youngsters, we were brainstorming about what can we do with the heritage of the neighborhood. And this resulted in a traveling exhibition that was in the shopping center, but also in the museum and another heritage organization in the city. And this was a process that was totally in collaboration with the youngsters. So they were responsible for the design, for the objects. They did research on their neighborhoods, for example, by interviewing local residents. They wrote the texts. They also came up with the themes for the exhibition. They got a photo assignment in which they were asked to make photos of things that are important to them in the neighborhood, people, locations, buildings, traditions. And out of these photos and conversations about these photos, we came up with some themes for the exhibition. For example, music and dance was important to them, but also a local food tradition in which people that visit your house never leave the house empty. So they always get a plate full of food with them. And because of this tradition, the plates move around in the neighborhood. So you always have plates of other people in your house. And that was visualized in the exhibition. Another project, or these two projects and other co-creations, made us decide that all the things we did wrong, but all the things that also went very good, were interesting for other organizations to get to know. So we wrote a little book about our experiences with co-creation. It's a free download online, and I will share the link later on. It's translated in English. And we try to motivate other organizations to also work with intangible heritage communities. And also try to show them, what things can go wrong, but also what are the chances of working together. Then also one research project I was engaged in the last 2 years, and it's still continued now. Over the last 2 years, I collaborated with a PhD student called Aholi So. We have a thesis prize award since 4 years, and he applied for this thesis prize. He didn't win, but I did invite him to have a conversation with me because his topic was about how to safeguard the Cantonese language in the Netherlands. And as a researcher interested in how people from migrant backgrounds safeguard their heritage in a migrant context, I asked him to have a conversation, and we decided together to have a study on first and second generation Dutch people from Chinese descent and how they interact and how the heritage transmission between these generations take form. And in this process, we also connected with this organization called Pan-Asian Collective, which is an organization that tries to empower the Asian Dutch community because they are often portrayed in a stereotypical way. And together with them, we gave presentations and also expanded our network because the Chinese Dutch people were not really a group of people that was connected to our inventory or our organization. So we really didn't knew each other. And through this research project, we have now a new network and new chances of, learning from each other. And maybe it will lead to a new inscription, but at least we have now a new and bigger network. Then some other interesting initiatives, because I was a little bit inspired by Seren's presentation when I saw some examples from other museums. And I also am a teacher at the Academy for Cultural Heritage. And so we often visit museums with students. And I want to tell you a little bit about some of these initiatives that relate to migrant, working with migrant communities. For example, in Antwerp, you have the Red Star Line Museum. And a very interesting initiative for them is that they have a garden where women from migrant backgrounds every week come and just talk with each other and with museum workers about what is important to them. And this is a follow-up of a project where they collected stories of migrant women for exhibition. And it's interesting because they started the project, but also decided to have a follow-up. And that's always important when you work with communities, that when the project finishes, you should try to not really end the collaboration there, because it's always better to have a continuous dialogue together. One important or interesting thing that they also did was have this van. This van moved around in the city to collect stories of the people of Antwerp, migrant stories. So that can also be an interesting thing to do as a museum, to be visible in the whole city and to just get into contact with people that live in your city. Also in Antwerp, I was there last month, is the Museum aan de Stroom, MAT. It's a city museum, and one of their new exhibitions is interesting because it is about martial arts. And this topic is interesting because it gives them the opportunity to connect with a lot of different migrant groups, because they take it very broadly. For example, they have contact with people that perform capoeira, kung fu, karate, and all sorts of other martial arts. And so they really expanded their network of people that live in Antwerp. So the advice from this exhibition would be to find for topics that relate to a lot of people from different cultures, and then bring these people together in this exhibition. More close to my own home is Imagine I See. Interesting in their way of working is that when they create an exhibition, they always see it sort of as a research project, in a way that they always work with the local residents, but they don't see the exhibition as an end product, but more as a next phase in the research. Because when they have the exhibition, people can come and add their own stories, or they can remove something. It's just another step in the process. And important to them is also that the communities are always the owner of what is happening in the exhibition. For example, if you give an object for the exhibition, you can always ask it back, and the museum will give it back immediately. And they are really an example in the Netherlands of how you can work with communities. They focus on a lot of teams. For example, 1 month ago, they opened an exhibition about this Chinese older man that had a shop for over 50 years in the neighborhood, and they made an exhibition about him. And they opened it with food, and people just walked in to see what was happening. There was a Chinese dragon dance performance in front of the museum, and it was really a happening that attracted a lot of people that just were walking on the street. Another example is from Rotterdam, Verhalenhuis Belvedere, Story House Belvedere, if I translate it. And the interesting thing about them is that they also try to collect the stories of the communities in the city. And their goal, and they state it on the website, is just to increase the happiness of people. And I think that by meeting each other, and especially by eating together, this can be done. And they are very successful over the last few years, and it's really a great place to go to. And then I have 2 more examples. Also from Rotterdam is the Maritime Museum, who decided to make an exhibition with 10 young makers, 10 young migrants or people with migrant background. And in co-creation, they gave them the chance to just visualize how they see their migrant story, and they were totally free to do how they were totally free to choose how they wanted to do it. And some of them were already artists, others got workshops how to maybe visualize their own story. And a lot of the things that they visualized was related also to intangible heritage. For example, an Ethiopian boy made something with a coffee ceremony, and there was a lot of things with music, and so it was really a co-creation with with the young people, and it was about their personal stories. The last that I want to mention is recently opened, and it's a little bit different than the other places. It's called Phoenix. It opened a month ago, and they focus on migration, but more from an art perspective, or that's the way how they portray it in the museum. I have not been there yet. I really want to go. It's a very big initiative, and just like the Red Star Line Museum in Antwerp, which is at the place where people really got on the boat to other continents. This is also at a place where people, where the ships that sailed to the Americas left or came, and it's a really big initiative. So I'm really curious about this. Well, to end my story, some key takeaways in the process of working with people, I could say, whether it's research or making an exhibition, I think trust and transparency is always key. So be transparent about what you want, what you expect, but also what the others can expect. So talk about your goals, the common goals, but also the separate goals of each partner. It's very important to give ownership to the communities. And in our collaborations, it was really helpful to find local partners or key figures in the community. For example, with the youngsters, it was very important that this foundation was located in the neighborhood, and they were familiar with the youngsters. So they were already trusted by the youngsters that we worked with. And sustainable relationships. What was maybe one of the best outcomes of the project with the youngsters was that they now have a sort of youngster department in the museum. So 5 of the youngsters out of the neighborhood now have a contract at the museum, and they can decide what projects they want to work on. Conclude, I think it's important to find your relevance in the community, as Nina Simon says, and make a room together. Make a new room together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marc, for your presentation and sharing these examples on how working with the convention or working as a researcher can help make living heritage more visible. I mentioned maybe that I think both Marc and I, when we speak about intangible cultural heritage, we don't speak only of elements that are in these inventories that he mentioned and I mentioned, but we speak about cultural heritage in general, so living heritage that is important to people, that is lived in the communities, because as in the introduction said, not all inventories always reflect the diversity of living heritage that is lived in a country. But I think your presentation, Marc, shows greatly how working with a living heritage independently, if it is in an inventory or not, is an important way to work, and how we can contribute as different institutions to support its visibility. With that being said, I hand over the word to Ceren for your presentation on working with cultural heritage, intangible cultural heritage of migrational background in museums in Turkey, and as well as other examples. So I give you the word, Sharon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear my voice because the sound is closed. I hope you can hear my voice. Okay. I'm just starting. I think you can hear my voice at the moment. Thank you so much. I hope you can. Of course, that was really great presentation and nice speech from Mark. And I think, yes, we are in the same room all around the world. And I really just had the storyline in this presentation, and I'm going to show you what sort of intangible cultural heritage research we have in Turkey. Especially, I can just want to give you a sharement about the museum view from migration to ethnography, not only from Turkey, but in the beginning, of course, there are some international examples. But generally, I've been there before. But the samples of Turkey is quite interesting, according to intangible cultural heritage. 3 years ago, I was in Vorarlberg Museum for 17 days, and that was very nice and very interesting practice for me and my colleague from Ankara University. And today, I really wanted to be with you, but I'm not in here with you because we have two days, a wonderful intangible cultural heritage practice. My cousin is getting married and she has an intangible cultural heritage wedding. And it's also a part of my culture. So I have to attend it while I'm just having this wonderful speech in here. As everyone knows, intangible cultural heritage is directly about the museums. And everyone knows that museums operate and communicate ethically, as everyone knows, and they professionally work with the professionals, and they're professionally working, of course, and with the participation of communities, as Nina Simon says, and Mark insists. And exactly they are offering also very varied experiences for education, enjoyment, reflection, and knowledge sharing. And while they are doing this, of course, in 2025, in last 18th of May, as everyone knows, the International Museum Day title is also saying, asking some questions about the future of museums in rapidly changing communities, and again, focusing on the communities. So I just put that photo on the left side, maybe you can exactly see. I really love that museum. It's from Çanakkale in Turkey. The name of the museum is Troy Museum, or the Museum of Troy. And because the Museum of Troy is just making different kind of opportunities and reflections exactly for the attendees and for the local people, as Jean Frère says, according to his museological approach, to museums must just play a great role for empowerment to society, as he says. The participatory is really important, the critics are very important, and the transformation is quite really important. And on the left side, as you can see, the women from nearby villages of the Troy Museum, they are dressed in traditional clothes, and of course, maybe you can realize the splash the colors to the scene, and some of them coming straight from tomato fields and express their curiosity about the museum, which has been under construction for many years. So that they were the first participants of the museum, and that was quite interesting for them to see what kind of new neighbor was constructed nearby their village. And of course, I have to cite Nina Simon, as Mark did, because her book, as you can see, the title of her book is The Participatory Museum, and she is quite interesting in the museology field, internationally, I mean, because she is insisting and emphasizing the diverse presentations, interactive learning, and community involvement and accessibility projects, and of course, collaboration. We have to find out and see more different opportunities to make it better. And also, I'd like to say the Kristen Lid's paper is also, I really like it so much because she says the museums are transforming and changing from dining room to kitchen. And she says the future of the museum will be the kitchen for everyone else. And she says, if I were to imagine a museum of the future, I would like to think of it as a kitchen. This is probably because I often perceive museums today as a dining room where the visitors are invited to dinner with the museum has cooked, the tableware is diligently set, the best silver is polished, and the order of the flood is chosen, the light are dimmed, and the setting arrangements are well thought out. That's quite interesting for me. And she says the best stories, the knowledge, the skills, and anything else can be cooked in here because here is the kitchen and it's like a community room. It's like everyone can understand each other very easily in the dining room. So both Nina Simon and Kristen Lintz just showed me the way, and according to their presentations, I just made this theoretical framework. Of course, when we talk about the intangible cultural heritage, especially not only in Turkey but also in Europe, we have to talk about migration. Of course, we have to talk about the museums as the platforms of cultural negotiation. And what about my country today? Approximately 19 million people are living in Turkey, and generally 3.5 million Syrian people under temporary protection are just lived in Turkey. Not only themselves, but also I can talk about the Afghanistani, Iranian, and African people. They are both refugees and they are both migrants, and we all are just living together. So, of course, the intangible cultural heritage is quite significant for museums because migration beyond its social, political, and different dimensions, it is a cultural heritage issue and very important cultural heritage issue. And because of this, the museums are really important and significant playing instruments about that. And we can make a trace and find different trace. I got my suitcase generally in every year and go to all around the world and seek the fortune for the migration museums. And I can see the topic of migration from directly migration museums, of course, as Mark just showed different and very diverse examples. And not only the migration museums, but also ethnographical museums, directly about the thematic museums of intangible cultural heritage and military museums also. And when we look at the literature, we can find lots of the oceans of very interesting positions and papers and articles about this situation. And they are reframing the history and making the definition of migration museum, what the migration museum is, what is the aim of the migration museum, or where the point of intangible cultural heritage is in the migration museums. In 2023, I just realized approximately 21 or 22 papers internationally. So Migration Museum aims to document the history of human mobility, of course, and its cultural impacts. But because we are living in a salad bowl, as you know, and we can affect each other whenever we live or wherever we go. So not only the cultural impacts of the communities, but also the personal stories. And of course, the phenomenon of migration is quite significant for the museums. And we have lots of samples. For example, in Europe, of course, the first migration museum, I just exactly realized that was in Hamburg. And that was really shocking for me to see that team, because in Turkey, we hadn't had this kind of migration museum yet. But I also realized different exhibitions and very various programs, just having different inclusive attendees, having inclusion and participation and social cohesion and anything else in Netherlands, and especially maybe the Amsterdam Museum is quite interesting, state museum, but it is having a great sections about migration, or Wallenstadt Immigration Museum that really affected me in Hamburg. They are telling not only the stories of people, but also the stories of communities. Or maybe you've been there before, but that museum the Museum of European and Mediterranean Civilizations, in short, MUSEM, in Marseille, that really affected me so much, not only with the construction abilities of the museum, but also the intersections, the galleries, the educational programs, the community programs, and the outreach programs. And that's quite interesting. That museum is just located in the Mediterranean basin, and its exhibitions often delve into the movements of people's ideas and goods that have shaped the religion's rich tapestry of civilizations. And maybe it will be possible for us to realize on September, because the professionals of this museum is coming to Turkey, and it could be really good to be in a same room with these professionals, I hope. And everyone knows the project Multaka. The Multaka means in Arabic meeting point, and it affected many separate museums and different types of museums in Europe, as everyone knows. The meeting point in Arabic is a very innovative intercultural museum initiative. It began in Berlin in 2015, and today I can just exactly put the photo of North African people, and they are just trained like guides, as a migrant guides, as a refugee guides in several museums, and telling the stories of their own stakeholders to the stories of their own lands and their pieces into the museum. In my case studies, I'd like to give you some little samples. I'm just picking them from my suitcase because one by one I just been into these museums in Turkey, and they are telling the story of migration, the ethnographical backgrounds, the intangible cultural heritage, and some very, very basic themes about the cultural heritage. The first one is Museum of Troy again. You can see the situation of this province in the Turkish map, and you can also see the building of this wonderful legendary city. There are lots of case studies and lots of overviews in that museum. Whose construction exactly completed in 2018, and it is located in the Tevfikiye village. So the Tevfikiye village is very famous in Turkey, especially in northwestern part of Anatolia, in Aegean Sea. And in Troy Museum, the life of Troy, the cultures of Troy is being told by the museum experts in archaeologically. But of course, the epics of Homer is quite international and very famous, but something is also very famous, and museum is using this intangible cultural heritage richness and wealth of this Dardanelles region. We can know that from museum to traditional Tevfikiye village, there are lots of intangible cultural heritage issues of Turkey are being celebrated. In Turkey, we approximately around 33 or 34 issues in the list of intangible cultural heritage of UNESCO, and that museum also celebrates Hıdrellez. And Hıdrellez, maybe you are familiar with that word in your own countries, in your diverse countries, of course. It is a vibrant and deeply rooted traditional spring celebration. The festival celebration, especially in Turkey and in several Balkan countries and in several Central Asian countries and Middle Asian countries also, we are celebrating the arrival of spring. And this celebration and this arrival is also symbolizes the renewal, the hope, the abundance, and the fertility. And it's very common all around the Turkey, and especially even in Istanbul, in 20 million city, people are just having some costumes and giving some costumes and having some celebrations, because it is quite significant in my country anyway. And it's being celebrated many of the museums, not only intangible cultural heritage museums, but even also very near to the village near archaeological museums. And another one you can see again on the map in very different province of Turkey. We are in Bayburt at the moment. It's very nice, a very harsh city. And I'd like to talk about Baksı Museum. It is in the nothingness. So that museum is quite nice because the founder of that museum is Samettin Koçan. He's also a very important Turkish artist, and he's also academician in Istanbul. He says the project of that museum is a rebellion against keeping Anatolian people away from craftsmanship and production. The story of that museum is quite interesting and very, very familiar and linked with the intangible cultural heritage. It's independent cultural institution. And we know that museum emphasizes inclusivity, community, and participation. Because in Freiburg as a city, we have very important and very great quantity of the stories of emigration. People didn't want to live in that city because of the lackness of the jobs in business. And they immigrated to different cities, not to different cities, but also to different countries. So it really affected the native people of the city. So Hüsamettin Koçan is one of them. And his father went to Germany to work, to give some money, to send some money to his family back in Turkey. So that's quite interesting story. And of course, Hüsamettin Koçan says, yes, we have to make some projects to keep our local people here in their village and in their city. That is a museum project. Hey, yes. He says, I'm an artist. I'm a museologist. The best thing I know is to building a museum and to sustain a museum or make a museum business. So they are having some projects. Maybe it could be possible for me to share just a few names of the projects. A call from Ihram to the future. In the middle of this presentation, you can see two ladies. They are wearing Ihram. The Ihram is a traditional garment of that region of Turkey. And this is a project in 2025. It's still being continued. And the civil society projects. And also the culture of taste. It's the story of local cuisine. It's also the local project of the museum. Doors opening to the future. It's a tourism project linked with the intangible cultural heritage of the region. And Anatolian in Varp, kilim weaving, carpet weaving project. It's also really deal with the national community of ICOM of Turkey and the UNESCO of Turkey. And even that museum is going to open the Women Training Center in Husame village near to Baksı Museum. The traditional weaving techniques such as ihram, kilims, carpet, and handcrafted products will be produced at the center because all of them are a part of intangible cultural heritage issues of Turkey in the list. And we are again in the same city, and I'd like to show it to you, the Kenan Yavuz Ethnographical Museum. Quite nice and very inspiring museum. It's a private ethnographical museum. You are just seeing the private ethnographical museum's wonderful garden in a village, in a Beşpınar village, sorry. The museum seeks to ensure that the traditions of rural life are not forgotten, to preserve the memory of villages abandoned due to migration, again, the same aim, the same purpose, and to build a bridge between the past and the future. And every object exhibited in the museum presents stories, a way of life of native people, and a cultural tradition. That's very sincere and very nice museum, that to make a room, to build a room for everyone. And museum specialists are also very brave to meet them, to gather them in the same room. It presents a contemporary museum model that offers a participatory, community-based and sensory cultural experiences, as you can share it. Again, very specific intangible cultural heritage activities are being done in that museum by the local people. And I have to say, you can see a harvest festival. It's also a spring festival, but it's very also an annual one. And a kind of celebration making, the successful gathering of crops, a tradition observed in various cultures worldwide. Maybe you are aware of this tradition. And these festivals typically involve the community feasting, rituals, and expressions of great faith to the abundance of the harvest. Something is also quite having my attention, because we have another museum into Marmara region, and that museum is also having a great construction, nice building, and it's also telling the story of the people from the population of exchange in 2023. So here you can see Çatalca Museum of Population Exchange, and it is a local heritage museum. It's very interesting and established to commemorate the 1923 population exchange between Turkey and Greece. And of course, there are lots of oral stories and wonderful memories, and maybe a little bit tiny memories. The Turkish and Muslim communities who migrated from Greece just came to this region and had this region as an establishment and as a country, as a neighborhood, and their oral stories and recorded testimonies from the descendants to exchanges can be seen in the galleries of that museum. And another one I discovered and been there before, Subaşı Primary School Migration Museum, a school transformed into an intangible cultural heritage and both migration museum. Again, that migration team's museum, of course, presents the Subaşı town in Yalova near to Istanbul, and the museum was created by carefully collecting and curating items that reflect the migration journey, the experiences during the journey, and the founding of the village. The founders are still alive at the moment, and they're having the same tradition with their ancestors. Some of them are being alive. And of course, they are telling the story of the developments in their local agriculture and the labor and the various ethnographic materials brought during the migration. And the title, the Wow Effect project of this Subaşı Primary School Museum is the Chest Stories. This is a very nice community-based project. This is also a still standing exhibition and featured 12 laundry chests along with the personal stories of the owners of the chests. And the project is a significant example of participatory practice in the museum and also includes activities that reflect intangible cultural heritage, such as traditional handicrafts. Generally, they are kept in the chests, as most probably all the attendees know and they are familiar. And the life of experiences related to their creation projects and the creation parts and societies, most probably. And we have lots of intangible cultural heritage practices in the museums. But as I said before, the types of museums are different. And one of them in Ankara, situated in Ankara, in my city, there is a wonderful little province called as Beypazarı. It's a very important province, and lots of intangible cultural heritage issues can be drawn up in there. And the Turkish Bath Museum is situated in there. This is the first Turkish Bath Museum in Ankara, in the capital city of Turkey. And on the left side, you can see a boy, a young boy. He is a Külhan Bey. The Külhan Bey is the man responsible for maintaining the fire under the bath, often seen as a rough but charismatic figure in traditional Turkish bath culture. So it is also being recorded in the intangible cultural heritage list of Turkey. So this is quite interesting to have this understanding as a museum construction, and then having a very important, like a heritage living bath museum still alive. And another one is very next to him. It's a kind of heritage village. It's situated in Ankara again, in Beypazarı again. It's a living village. On the left side, you can see the local people. They are being gathered all together, especially in some food, traditional food making. They want to raise awareness among children and young people about intangible cultural heritage, because we need it. And they have to revive fading traditions in the face of rural to urban migration. And they have to provide a space where visitors can actively engage with traditional crafts and daily rural practices, because it is designed as a heritage village. And we can understand for children and young people, they are making a village square laundry washing activities and organizing some communal areas and many intangible cultural heritage practices altogether, away from great big cities. And of course, we have, as Mark says, some cultural heritage institutions, but also some intangible cultural heritage museums in some several universities in Turkey, in Ankara, in Ankara Gölbaşı again, in Nevşehir, in Cappadocia region. And many of them, especially having some practices for young people, for elder people, and for preschoolers and anyone else you can imagine. Their aim is especially giving the importance of some practices about the list of intangible cultural heritage and in need of urgent safeguarding, not only in Turkey, but also in some other countries. They are sharing the same traditions. And of course, they are making different kind of traditions in some special days, like a traditional meetings in ICH in Turkey's list, or Turkish coffee practices in some eco museums, in some living museums, in some ethnographical museums. And they're really good to have these kind of practices in Turkey. And of course, we are just a changing community at the moment. Turkey is even a changing community. We have lots of migrants and lots of migrant stories, and we have also immigration stories. This is quite complex. But as everyone knows and understands, these museums share several common features, and they focus on preserving and showcasing intangible cultural heritage, such as oral traditions, as also Mark emphasized, such as rituals, craftsmanships, and some social communities. And most are community-based and participatory, involving and local people collections and interpretations and presentations of cultural materials. So we have to make more and more participatory practices to like a co-creation with migrant communities, like many more storytellings and oral history applications, and many more maybe community workshops and educational programs. And in addition, all these museums adopt experiential and immersive approaches, and allowing visitors to engage the heritage through touch and storytelling, re-enchantments, and the local narratives. Of course, their goal is not only to preserve traditions, but also to keep them alive with contemporary cultural life, because we are fading all the cultural backgrounds. As a conclusion, as an academician from Ankara University, Turkey, the Department of Museology, of course, the context of sustainable development is giving us some guidance and showing us the way. But museums in Turkey are reimagining their roles through intangible cultural heritage and migration. I'm aware of them. In 2022, the ICOM definition provides a valuable framework for its issue, as everyone agrees. And maybe some lackness, maybe, I don't know. And call for ethically engaged and community-driven museology, and the universities has to study it more collaborative works. And as a conclusion, our aim must be we need a community participation, of course, using more museum spaces for on-site training and international training, both collaboration and intangible cultural heritage performances we more and more need. And we have to build cross-sectoral partnerships with the schools, with NGOs, and with artists, maybe. They are attending most different perspectives also. They are giving very different perspectives. And we have to focus on the capacity building for museum professionals and community bureaus. And we should reframe museum collections to include stories and memories and social practices, not just objects. Of course, it's the idea and the philosophy is changing. And yes, here are young connected migrants. You can see, I'd like to thank with them. They are Syrian migrants. They're playing football in the fields of great world city, Istanbul. Yeah, this is what I have. This is what I'd like to emphasize, what I'd like to share, and my conclusion. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ceren, for sharing the many examples of different museums working on the topic of, or including cultural heritage as an important topic, not only in terms of exhibiting them, but also making them the lived practice visible in their work. And in the spirit of exchanging examples, we will continue with the World Cafe afterwards, but first, if there are open questions to our two speakers, you may pose them now. One question in front.
Thank you for these presentations. Do the speakers hear us?
They should, yes.
Okay.
Do you hear the?
Yes.
Okay. So I have a question to Mark Schepp. He mentioned that there is like a safeguarding plan when some practices are recognized as intangible cultural heritage, and that there are problems with it to the communities. So I also wondered, how can you preserve a living practice? So I really can't really imagine how something that you practice and that is part of your daily life, or that is always changes, how can you preserve it? So what is this safeguarding plan? What do the communities have to do?
Matt, do you want to add?
Thank you for the question. That was sort of also one of the main questions that we questioned ourselves, because also in the UNESCO Convention, and when you make an international nomination, you should write a safeguarding plan. And the safeguarding plan is sort of a plan in which you reflect on the current status of your ICH. So who are involved, what are possible threats, and that is the thing we also do in the Netherlands. So we ask them to identify all the key elements of their intangible cultural heritage with the idea that it helps to safeguard. We also ask them to identify possible threats and think about possible solutions. And we found out that for some communities this really helps, and also talking about it with us. But for some it's just not really helping. It's just sort of a waste of time, because it's the safeguarding happens by itself. It is just working well in practice, and they don't really need this big document with reflection. But for others, it was sort of, it gave them insights on what they might sort of improve or can do to tackle some challenges. For example, how to involve young people, or but they also get questions about, for example, new laws and regulations and how they can deal with that. So it's quite a long document, and we will try to still have conversations about this safeguarding. So, for example, when someone comes to us and is interested in the inventory, or just interested in talking about safeguarding, we can still have these questions that are in the safeguarding plan, but just talk about it and not make it as an obligation for them to fill it in and to reflect on it. So it's more, the idea is to use it more in a flexible way, only when it helps them. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
I can also maybe send an example of what questions we asked to Christina, although she probably sort of have the same questions in the Austrian version, but
we have, so safeguarding is the core of the convention. So, also in Austria, it's an application process. So people who are in this inventory, it's not like Michael Kaspar, who sits in the advisory board, it's a you and you not, but people have to apply to be part of this inventory, as it is in many countries, not all, because every country has a different system how to approach becoming part of the inventory. But safeguarding, as it is the core and the title of the name, is most often a question: how do you safeguard their intangible heritage? And by that means mostly, how do you continue it? What do you do in order to ensure its continuation? Which does not mean preserve it, because preservation would mean that it would need to stay the same. And safeguarding applies, it can change. It can change aspects, it can change things, as living heritage does. It's a living thing. So the convention specifically underlines that things can change over time and the depth in order to stay relevant for the people practicing it. So an intangible cultural heritage does not become not one because, I don't know, maybe in one practice needs a certain temple to do it. So it involves usually going to a certain temple or a church. But when I move, I don't have this infrastructure maybe anymore. So I adapt to a new room, but it does not make it less of a intangible cultural heritage because the object related to it moves away. I adapt to a new circumstance that I find and still stays a living heritage. So, and I think that is the very important aspect when we speak about objects, we speak about preservation. When we speak about living heritage, we speak about safeguarding. And safeguarding is still this, many communities will say, I do this by practicing it. Yes, that is true. But sometimes we need a strategy to gather new people to stay relevant, to change aspects and parts of it for newer generations to still become, because if it does not stay relevant for the newer generations, it will cease to exist. So that is in short the summary.
To add a little bit to my answer, sorry, because the focus in our work will be maybe even more on safeguarding, because before it was sort of an end goal to be on the inventory, and now we want to have more focus on showing how these communities safeguard their heritage and share it more with others. So to really create a platform where they can share their safeguarding ideas, so they can inspire each other how to continue and safeguard their heritage. Because before it was more like this highlight case of being on the inventory, and it was too important in our opinion. And now, the focus is more on, the importance of how to keep your heritage alive.
Are there any other questions in the room?
I have a question for Chair Guneros. Thank you for the very interesting presentation. My question is maybe kind of provocative, but it's not provocative. But I wanted to ask how you integrate in your cultural heritage initiatives the cultural heritage of like so-called minorities also living in Turkey, like for example Kurds or Armenians or Greek people or Alevites, like because you had a lot of very interesting museum focusing on Turkish history, which is very important, but as we all know from the states we're living, that is like kind of more. So I would ask how this is part of your initiatives in Turkey. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. This is quite interesting because the minorities, of course, another issue, but the minority voices and the minority reflection in the museums are generally under the direct shade of the Ministry of Culture and Tourism. And we have approximately 625 museums all around Turkey. And these museums, half of them are private ones. And we can see some reflections of native people, especially in some private museums. And for example, in Bayburt, there are some migrants and also immigrant people and also some minorities in there. And they are reflecting their own stories, their own ancestries, and their own traditions in here in some several workshops, even in some exhibitions. It's quite easy to see their stories. And I didn't put in here as a presentation, but in Prince Islands, in Istanbul, in Marmara region, there are some special private museums, like a state museum, but it's also being funded by the private institutions and societies. It is called as Adalar Museum. And there are some old Istanbul Greek people's stories. You can see their photographs and stories and their records and their way of life exhibitions in there as a minority story. Maybe I can give you as an example. And especially in Cappadocia region, there are lots of private museums. Sometimes we cannot be aware of these kind of minority reflections in state museums, but we can do in private museums. Even in the language, sometimes can change in the labels. both Turkish and some other minority examples. And even in Arabic, sometimes we can realize, because approximately 3.5 Syrian migrants and also being lived in Anatolia. And we also have some Turkish people can speak Arabic in some regions and Kurdish in some regions of Turkey, as everyone knows. Just people are trying to do, especially some workshops, some intangible cultural heritage ateliers, and even the private museum exhibitions. As I said before, in Cappadocia, we got the Intangible Cultural Heritage Museum, which is telling the old names of the cities of Cappadocia, because the great Greek population, especially as Çatalca, the Immigration Museum, and the Museum of Population Exchange, as I just showed you, as a region. These kind of similar stories and oral representations and little temporary exhibitions can be seen one by one. They just started. Maybe it could be the answer for your question. Yes, some samples. It's very easy to realize.
Okay, there was one question in the front, and I would say afterwards we have a little break before we go into the working
Thank
group.
you very much to the lecturers. My question, how do we address the dark side of intangible cultural heritage? So-called old traditions are often not free from racism, anti-sexism, sexism, anti-Semitism, anti-Ziganism. To burn witches, the Schwarze Piet how do you address that in your museums? Yeah, that would be.
Shall I start?
Yeah, this man.
Yeah.
Well, it's also a question that we ask ourselves often. Well, especially you mentioned, of course, the Zwarte Piet, Black Piet, which is a figure in the tradition of Sinterklaas, which we celebrate at the 5th of December. And it used to be on the national inventory. It was inscribed by a community that was really in favor of Zwarte Piet and was not really open for a conversation about change. And in the end, it was removed from the inventory. But now, because last December in the Open Air Museum, we opened a new place, especially focusing on intangible heritage. It's called the House of Intangible Heritage. And in this exhibition, we were also debating how to portray issues like this. Also, for example, should we have a picture with Black Piet to have a conversation about it, or should we get rid of all these images with Black Piet? And also, and in the end, it was in the exhibition, but not specifically with a photo of Black Piet, but also on our website with the inventory. If you look carefully to the texts and the photos, you can see, although the tradition is not specifically about something controversial, you can read things that are controversial because the communities write the texts themselves. Now, we will be more active in editing or writing the text ourselves in the future, and also in the monitoring of the photos, because even in traditions, for example, one food tradition, there was this food truck, and there was this picture of Black Piet in this food truck, and so we are sort of reproducing the stereotypical images. So we are more and more aware of our role in sort of what we can show and what we shouldn't show. But we always try to have a conversation about it. So, for example, in the exhibition about animals, there's also a lot of criticism about animals in traditions, and a lot of traditions are even forbidden nowadays. The traditions that we portrayed are still active, so they are not against any regulations so far. But that can be in the future, of course. For example, a cattle market or the singing birds in a cage. Maybe in the near future that is not allowed anymore. And in this exhibition, we tried to show the stories of the community, but also we had a
Sorry, Mark.
dialogue table.
Unfortunately,
which,
we're running out of time a little bit. I'm very sorry.
My last sentence.
Yeah.
We had a dialogue table in which we asked the visitors questions to reflect on how suitable these traditions are, or how good these traditions are to safeguard.
Sharon, you want to add something to this shortly, but we can debate this question, of course.
Maybe after the break, when we are having a conversation as a table, maybe I can add something else. Don't want to make more time, just have more time.
Okay, then you will be at the table afterwards anyways.
Okay.
For the research, contribution of research. So to the,
yes.
I see the hand of Martin Fritz still. Martin?
Yes, thank you very much for the valuable contributions, and just 1 minute to the last item, because we're also very much concerned about it. If some of the people in the room will know about the, let's say, controversy about a local custom in Vorarlberg, and in that case we talk about a structured monitoring dialogue. So we are also inviting the actors to talk to one another about alternatives. But we established the idea that controversy is at least a sign of something that's alive, that people pay attention to. But it might even be the case that the controversy becomes part of the tradition. So we decided, for example, that we now included more references and the voices from the controversy within the description of the element in the inventory. So that's one way to go, that at the first step, we're not, neglecting that it's there. So that the first step is to show there it is. The next steps, we'll see where change will happen or not. But that was just the final word. I'm sure this theme will keep you busy. Thank you very much for all the contributions.
Thank you. And maybe we will discuss this point further with Sharon also at the research table. So I thank all the contributors online for their input, and there are many examples shared in the last hour. We will be having a 10-minute break, 20-minute break until 5 to 8. Kann ich rechnen? No. Until 8.
8
Sorry, 8 o'clock. Where I will divide you into, where we divide in the 4 tables. I will announce them 5 minutes before end of the break, so you can kind of find yourself around the tables, and then we will continue our discussion in the singular groups on different aspects on how to enhance and support the visibility and the practicing of living heritage by a multi-rooted society. So I thank again Mark Schepp and Sharon Günneres for their valuable input, and you can watch all of their presentations was streamed, so you can watch also afterwards their input still online. The stream ended here. So I know that Mark, you will not be joining us. Martin, also I wish you a nice evening, and thank you again for coming and contributing to today's share. And we will see each other at the table afterwards, after the break, back at 8 o'clock. Okay? Thank you very much, and have a nice break. Please drink some.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.